today we're talking about forgiving, because obviously in the aftermath of war, where horrible things have been done, then you can see how forgiveness can become a very difficult issue. And there are many misunderstandings about the issue of forgiveness. And it's quite possible that if you have suffered at the hands of someone, that as soon as I even start talking about the subject, as soon as I link forgiveness with remembrance and war, for some people that will be incredibly hard. It will make anger rise up inside them. It might even make you think, all right, that's it. I do not want to listen to a talk telling me I'm supposed to be a forgiving person or anything like that. What I want to say to you is keep listening. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. That's the point of this course. And I'm going to clear up a lot of misunderstandings about forgiveness and hopefully bring freedom to your life as you know that truth. So I'm going to try and answer 3 questions today, which are: why do we forgive? Why is it hard to forgive? Some people might even ask, why is it impossible to forgive? And thirdly, how? How do we forgive? So let's look at each of those in turn. Firstly then, why do we forgive? Firstly, and probably most importantly, is to reduce the pain that we are feeling. Maybe even to stop the pain that we're feeling. Do you remember last week we were talking about handling negative emotions and recognizing that pain can be a sign that there is something wrong, a non-physical problem. And the pain that we experience because of the hurt that's been done to us, how can we make that pain go away? How can we have a healthy response to that? And the answer is, it is through forgiveness that we address that pain. When you forgive someone, it's important to remember you are forgiving them for your benefit, not for their benefit. They, quite frankly, probably don't care whether you forgive them or not, a lot of people. But you are forgiving them so that you benefit. It has been said that holding on to unforgiveness is like swallowing poison, but then expecting someone else to die. The poison's going to hurt you, not them. Or another illustration I've heard, imagine you go fishing with somebody, and as they're casting the line, the fish hook flies off, and imagine that it catches on you, and now you're hooked on that fish hook. How do you respond to that? Do you start moaning at the person? Do you start complaining? Do you start saying, look what you've done to me? Look how horrible you've been to me. Look, everybody, look at the suffering that I'm going through. Is that your focus? Or is your focus, how do I get this hook out? How do I stop the pain? And it's interesting because in English we have an expression about letting someone off the hook. And we sometimes think, well, if I forgive them, I'm letting them off the hook. But what I want you to understand is, you're not letting them off the hook. Forgiveness is getting you off the hook. So the first reason that we forgive is to reduce and hopefully eventually to stop most, if not all, of the pain. Second thing, we forgive so that the enemy does not take advantage of us. 2 Corinthians 2 verses 10 to 11 says this: Now, whom you forgive anything, I also forgive. This is Paul writing to the Corinthians. For if indeed I have forgiven anything, I've forgiven that one for your sake in the presence of Christ, get this, lest Satan should take advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. Paul says, the reason I'm forgiving in this situation is so that Satan does not take advantage of us. You see, unforgiveness can lead to the enemy being able to take advantage. In that particular context, it's within a church where there's unforgiveness between people in a church, and that causes division and problems within that setting. But there are other contexts as well where unforgiveness gives the enemy an advantage. Third reason is because God asks us to. Unforgiveness affects your relationship with God. In Matthew 18, Peter goes to Jesus and he asks him the question. He says, Jesus, how many times should I forgive my brother? 7 times? Okay, now we know what people are like. And that question does not come from nowhere. When Peter goes to Jesus and says, how many times must I forgive my brother? That's because someone has been annoying him. He thinks someone is a problem to him, and he's thinking, do I have to forgive this person? You know, it might even have been John. There's quite a few little hints in the Gospels that suggests there's been a rivalry between Peter and John. And maybe John has got up his nose for the 6th time, or the 7th time, maybe the 8th time. And Peter goes, Jesus, do I have to forgive him 7 times? And you know what he's thinking. And Jesus goes, no, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. And to be honest, that's really just a Jewish way of saying forever. It's not actually a number that you add up to. Jesus is saying you keep on forgiving. And then Jesus tells a parable to explain it. He says, this is what the kingdom of heaven is like. So we're trying to understand something about how God works with us in this parable. He says there is a servant who owes the king a huge amount of money, a massive amount of money. Now, in this story, you and I, we are the servant. The king is God. We owe God so much. We have a debt that we could not possibly pay. And this servant cannot pay the king, so the king says, okay, I'm going to sell you as a slave. I'm going to save your wife as a slave. I'm going to sell your children. I'm going to sell everything you have. You are going to be slaves from now on, and I'll recoup some of my debt. Now that's justice. Justice is giving someone the punishment they deserve, and God is a God of justice. Let's not forget that. So he is saying, I will give justice for this servant who cannot pay the debt. Well, the servant says, please, please give me more time. I'll try and make it up to you. Well, there's no way that he ever could, and yet the king forgives him, cancels the debt. That's mercy. Mercy is when you don't give someone the punishment they deserve. So God is a God of justice. He will give punishment to those deserve, but he's also a God of mercy because he will not give the punishment to people who deserve it. It says in James 2:13, with God, mercy triumphs over judgment. And out of interest, while we're defining terms, grace is when you give someone the good that they don't deserve. Justice is when they get what they deserve, the punishment they deserve. Grace is when you give them goodness when they don't even deserve it. And that's what God is to us. Well, the next part of the story is the servant is so happy, he goes out, he is forgiven, but he sees someone who owes him money, quite a small amount of money in comparison. And he says, hang on, you pay me or I'll get you thrown in prison. And the man can't pay. Well, the servant gets him thrown in prison, and the king is really, really angry with him. He's basically saying, why should I show mercy to you when you won't show mercy to your fellow servants? Why should I forgive you when you will not forgive others? I cancelled an enormous, a massive debt for you. What I'm asking you to forgive other people for is small in comparison. You see, if we hold unforgiveness in our hearts, it's a bit like us saying, I want God's forgiveness, but I'm not willing to give other people forgiveness. That affects our relationship with God in a really negative way. And that can be a hard thing to hear because that unforgiveness is really tough. And trying to forgive someone is really tough. And when I said, it's like saying to God, I want your forgiveness, but I'm not willing to forgive. Some of you will have said, Ian, it's not that I'm not willing, but I'm not able to forgive. So let's address this second question. Why is it so hard? Why does it feel impossible to forgive? Well, the first thing is, it is clouded over by emotional pain. Remember, this is on the back of handling negative emotions last week. Unforgiveness brings up all kinds of awful negative emotion. That clouds us. It brings the pain. That's why it's hard to forgive. And that's made even worse because we're not even certain what we're supposed to be doing. It can be very hard for us to define, well, what exactly is forgiveness? When I'm trying to forgive somebody, what exactly am I trying to do? So to try and clarify that, I'm going to give three things that forgiveness is not, and then explain three things that forgiveness is. The first thing is forgiveness is not forgetting. If you have been hurt, you are never going to forget that. The way that the human brain works is some of the strongest memories that we have are of times when we were hurt, when there was a strong negative emotion. So you are not going to forget what was done to you. So if you ever find yourself saying, I cannot forgive them because I cannot forget what they did, well, that's not an issue, because forgiving is not forgetting. Secondly, forgiveness is not pretending. When we forgive somebody, we're not pretending, oh, well, it didn't matter what you did. Of course it mattered. We're not pretending it was okay. Of course it wasn't okay. We're not pretending it doesn't hurt anymore. Of course it still hurts. And if you've ever said or thought the words, I cannot forgive them because it hurts too much, and I can't pretend that it doesn't hurt, well, then that's a misunderstanding. Because forgiving someone is not about whether it hurts or not. In fact, as I said at the beginning, the irony is that if you forgive, that will lead to reducing your pain. So refusing to forgive someone on the basis that it hurts too much is the exact opposite of what we need to do. Third thing that forgiveness is not putting up with sin. And one of the issues that we sometimes have is Christians get taken advantage of. Someone is doing something to hurt us, and then we forgive, and they do it again. We forgive, and they do it again, and they forgive. And they just treat us as if we're people who are supposed to put up with sin. God hates sin. We do not have to remain in a situation of being hurt because we have forgiven someone. That is not the same as forgiveness. Letting someone repeatedly hurt you is nothing to do with forgiveness. So three quick things about if you're in that situation where you are repeatedly being hurt by someone. Number one, you might need to set down some boundaries, some guidelines, even give an ultimatum. If you do that again, I am going to leave you, tell the police, tell your family, whatever. It's not wrong to forgive someone for the past, but say, but I'm not going to let you do that to me again. Second thing that you might do is you might remove yourself from the situation. You might recognize that if you stay there, you are going to be hurt repeatedly. And God isn't asking you to stay and be hurt repeatedly. So it might be that you just say, I'm off. I'm having nothing to do with you anymore. I forgive you, but I'm not going to suffer any more at your hands. You are forgiven, but I'm going to leave this situation. And the third thing that you may actually need to do is you may need to inform the authorities if a crime has been committed. Forgiveness does not mean that the process of law is ignored. In issues of abuse, our church, we have a zero tolerance to any safeguarding issue, and our policy is absolutely clear. If we suspect any kind of abuse going on, we report it to the authorities. Not a matter of whether we forgive or not, it is a matter of following the law. So don't think that if a crime has been committed, that means that you cannot report that crime. You can forgive and yet still let the authorities go through the process of law. So, three things that forgiveness was not. It isn't forgetting, it isn't pretending, it isn't putting up with sin. Three things that forgiveness is. Now, the first one, and this one isn't even in the course, this is something I've thrown in because it's really important. Forgiveness is letting go. The Greek word for forgiveness used in the Bible means to let someone go. And it's used in a legal context where someone is put on trial, they're found guilty, They have done something wrong. They could be punished. And then they are let go. So when we are forgiving someone, we're basically saying, I am going to let you go. What you did, it did matter. It wasn't okay. We're saying that it did hurt us, and yet I choose to just let it go. Ultimately, that is what forgiveness is. Recognizing what has happened and saying, I'm going to let it go. Second thing that forgiveness is deciding, making a choice that you will not seek revenge. You see, one of the negative things that comes up when we're hurt by someone is that we want them to suffer. They made us suffer. We want them to suffer. We don't want them to get away with it. We don't want it swept under the carpet. We want revenge. But this is what God says in Romans 12:19. Do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's anger. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. So, where it comes to revenge, you don't take the revenge. You put it in God's hands. You say, right, I'm going to let you go, but I'm letting you go and leaving it up to God. And let's be very clear, God is a God of justice. And if a person does not ask for forgiveness, if that person does not turn to God, then they will receive punishment. There will come a day of judgment, and everything that they've done, including what they did to you, they will be judged for those actions. So when you say, I want revenge, you don't need to get revenge because justice is going to be done. If, of course, that person does turn to Christ, does ask for forgiveness, then do you know what? Then Jesus took their punishment, just like he took your punishment, just like he took my punishment. You know, I've done stuff wrong in my life, and people could have exacted revenge on me. But the truth is, I'm now forgiven, and Jesus takes any punishment that I am due. That's the mercy and grace of God. So, in forgiving, you are saying, I'm not going to get revenge. I'm going to let it go. I'm not going to get revenge on that person. Last thing that forgiveness is. Forgiveness is accepting that you have to live with the consequences of someone else's sin. Let me say that again. Forgiveness is accepting that you have to live with the consequences of someone else's sin. And instantly we think about that. That's not fair. Why should I have to live with the consequences of their sin? It was their sin. They're the one who did the stuff wrong. Why do I have to live with the consequences? And you're right. It's not fair. God isn't saying it's fair. I'm not saying it's fair. But you know what I am saying? I'm saying it's inevitable. In a world where God has given us free will, it is inevitable that people will hurt each other. Whether you like it or not, we are all living with the consequences of other people's sin. What they do affects us, and we live with the consequences. We have no choice about whether we live with the consequence or not. So what am I saying? I'm saying you accept that you live with the consequences of someone else's sin. You see, if you won't accept that, if you're going through life saying, I will not accept that I have to live with those consequences, you're kidding yourself. You're fooling yourself. You will be in pain your whole life because people will repeatedly hurt you. But in forgiveness, we recognize we are going to live with those consequences. In fact, we do have a choice. Not a choice about whether we live with the consequences or not, but we have a choice how we live with them. Do we live with them chained up in bondage to that bitterness and unforgiveness? Or do we live in the freedom of forgiveness. That's your choice. Okay, I've talked about why we forgive. I've talked about why it's hard to forgive. I've tried to define what forgiveness is and isn't. And hopefully that's going to make it a bit easier for you now to forgive. The question is, how? What is the process of forgiving someone? I give you 5 steps, literally step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 steps to how you forgive. 1, you identify where the unforgiveness is. And you might think, well, how do I do that? It's pretty simple. Where does it hurt? Where's the pain? If you're not experiencing pain from something, chances are you've already forgiven them. The issue is resolved. But if you're still feeling pain, that might be a sign you have not resolved that issue. Of course, you might have resolved it. And like I said at the beginning, the fact that we forgive doesn't mean that all the pain goes away. But if you are struggling with the pain of something, it might be that you have not forgiven yet. So that's the first thing, identify it. Second thing is you talk to God about what they did. You remember the pain, you remember the situation, you say, God, this person did this to me. This is the list of things that they did. And you do this for everything. If you can think of 5 or 6 areas or 20 areas, you do this one by one for each area. You talk to God. This is the thing I'm talking about today. This is what they did. And then, pardon me, the third thing you do, you tell God how it made you feel and how it makes you feel. You don't pretend it's okay. You don't rush through this process. You're trying to resolve an issue. So you say, God, they did this to me and it made me feel like this and I still feel like this about it. That's honest. Remember last week, I said to handle emotions well, you've got to be honest. So talk to God about that. Fourth thing you do is when you've got it all off your chest to God about how much pain you're in, you say this, God, I choose to forgive them. I choose to let them go. I forgive them. Now, some of you might be a bit confused here. You're saying, why are you telling God that? Why are you talking to God about the fact that you forgive someone? Well, that's because forgiveness is primarily an issue between you and God. It is not primarily an issue between you and the person you are forgiving. And that is a game changer for some of you. It's not about your relationship with the person you're forgiving. It is mostly about your relationship with God. After all, the person that you're forgiving may not know that you're forgiving them. They may not care that you are forgiving them. Reconciliation is something very different. Reconciliation is when you become friends again, or that relationship is restored. And forgiveness does not necessarily mean that relationship is restored. Forgiveness is about letting them go. Reconciliation is about restoring relationship. And you can forgive someone and yet not have reconciliation. Not least because that depends on them as well. If you want to be reconciled and they won't be, there's nothing you can do about that. But that doesn't stop you forgiving them. You see how forgiveness is between you and God. So you tell God, this is what I'm doing now. In this moment, I release them. I let it go. I'm not seeking vengeance anymore. I'm not going to carry this hurt anymore. I release it. That is forgiveness. I said there were 5 steps. What's the 5th one? When you feel the hurt again, and notice I said when, not if. When you feel the hurt again, that does not mean you have not forgiven them. Remember we were talking a couple of weeks ago about the devil's tricks of accusation, temptation, and deception. And when you feel that pain again, then you get an accusation. See, you didn't forgive them. You get a deception. You see, the pain didn't go away. If you'd forgiven them, there'd be no pain. That's all lies from the enemy. What has happened when the pain comes back is that you have had a painful memory trigger. Something has triggered a return to the pain of what happened in that situation. And when that happens, the healthy way to handle it is this. You say, okay, I am honest. I am remembering the pain of what they did to me. But I also remember that on that day, you do it today, 11th of November, 2021, fine. You can say, on that day, the 11th of November, 2021, I released them. And I recognize I feel some pain still, but I have released them. I have let them go. I have put them in God's hands. Any kind of judgment, any kind of justice, God will see that that gets done. I don't need to carry this pain anymore. I don't want to swallow that poison anymore. Remember at the beginning I said, it's like swallowing poison and expecting them to die. If you feel that hurt, just say to yourself, I am not going to swallow that poison. I'm not going to put that hook back in my mouth. I have let them go. I release them. And because you've released them, you walk in the forgiveness that you already did, maybe weeks, months, or years ago. It's a process. It can take time. But over time, that pain will subside. That's how you forgive. What next? How do you respond to what you've just heard? You know, if you've got an issue of unforgiveness in your life, it won't have been fixed just because you've heard me give this talk. It takes more than hearing a talk to resolve some of these deep-seated issues. So here's my suggestion. You might want to listen to this talk again. It's here in the form of the whole service, but you might have noticed that I put up the talk section separately so it's easy to find and listen to again. You might want to do that. You might want to talk to someone about it. You might want to talk to me about it. If you talk to someone else, make certain that you're talking about the same thing when you talk about forgiveness. There is a school of thought, not among Christians by the way, but there is a school of thought that it's really unhealthy to ask someone to forgive. And the problem is they're not talking about forgiveness the way I am. They're saying you can't tell someone to forget. You can't tell someone to pretend it doesn't hurt. Well, of course you can't. You know, if you're talking to someone and they're saying, oh, when people tell you to forgive, that's a really terrible thing to expect someone to do. Yeah, that's because they don't understand what we're talking about, forgiveness. So, by all means, talk to someone, but do make certain you're talking about forgiveness in the same way. It might help you to get it off your chest, and it might help prepare you to take those steps to forgive.